Do you want to learn more on how to put money to work in regenerative food and agriculture? Follow our video course via investinginregenerativeagriculture.com/course or in the links below. Now, on to the podcast. One of the leading regen farmers in Europe is building an experience center in the Netherlands to show the connection between healthy soils, healthy produce and healthy people, and empower farmers to seek independent advice on a regenerative transition, not advice paid for by the chemical input industry. So farmers can finally negotiate a better price with the retail industry based on quality, not on quantity. Welcome to another episode of Investing in Regenerative Agriculture, Investing as if the planet mattered, a podcast show where I talk to the pioneers in the regenerative food and agriculture space to learn more on how to put our money to work to regenerate soil, people, local communities and ecosystems while making an appropriate and fair return. Why my focus on soil and regeneration? Because so many of the pressing issues we face today have their roots in how we treat our land, grow our food and what we eat. And it's time that we as investors, big and small, and consumers start paying much more attention to the dirt/soil underneath our feet. In March last year, we launched our membership community to make it easy for fans to support our work. And so many of you have joined as a member. We've launched different types of benefits, exclusive content, Q&A webinars with former guests, Ask Me Anything sessions, plus so much more to come in the future. For more information on the different tiers, benefits and how to become a member, check gumroad.com/investingregenag or find the link below. Thank you. Welcome to another episode. Today with farmer Mellany Klompe. Together with her husband Jeroen, who we had on one of the earlier podcasts, she runs probably one of the most innovative farms in Western Europe. She's also co-founder of Soy Heroes and director of the Soy Heroes Foundation. Welcome, Mellany.
Hello, Koen. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so happy to have you on the show. And I'm starting with a personal question, which I know in this case is a very interesting journey that you had leading you to working very deeply on soil and on farming. But what has been that journey to farming?
Yeah, I think it started with my study. I studied environmental science. At the time when I needed to choose which direction I wanted to study, it was or I wanted to make people healthier, so become a doctor or something else, or try to achieve a better world and make the world healthier. So I chose the latter. And after I finished that education, I worked on several governmental organizations, primarily on landscape, biodiversity, and water. Here in the Netherlands, we have a specific organization. It's called the Water Boards here, and it's a very big governmental organization. So you could say from that perspective, I always were involved with water, with soils and biodiversity. And as we are living in the Netherlands, if you look at the rural countryside, it's always about agriculture combined with all these elements. So the all things together, agriculture, soils, biodiversity, water. I created and developed my own interest. And then because we have a farm at home, I'm also in the time between married a farmer. I'm not a native farmer myself, but my husband is. And if you talk to each other on the kitchen table, you could say the two worlds emerged together. And I discovered that the soil problems were huge for the farm. And then together with my husband, we started to, you could say, on this journey to see how we could make the soil healthier and better, as we discovered about 10 years ago. Especially we suffered from big, you could say, soil compaction, soil depletion, or our organic matter was going down rapidly. So from that point on, together with my husband, step by step, plot by plot, we added measures to create a systemic change in it. And it meant for us that we need to do farming on a very different way than the conventional way we were used to. And we also discovered that, for instance, advisors, the current advices which we had then around the farm could not help us with that systemic change. So we needed to develop our own knowledge on that. And at that time when we started, the word regenerative farming was not known at all here in the Netherlands. And I think about 7 years ago, that was the first time we discovered that there was a technique like regen agriculture. And from that point on, I'm always telling the world, from that point on, you have a word you can Google, and then the world opens up.
And then everything becomes easier. Yeah. You're not alone anymore. It doesn't become easier, but you're not alone anymore. Yeah.
No, but we saw we were pretty alone in Northwest Europe. But we saw that farmers in especially Australia and the center of America and South Africa already were exploring and doing regen ag practices. And we read a lot about them. We got in contact with them and tried to step by step apply those measures also on our farm. So that's how we began with our journey.
And do you remember what was the first step from the kitchen table discussions in the evenings, during dinner, breakfast, etc., where you sort of started working together on that? Like, what was the first things you did in the field? Like, how did it get from the kitchen table to the field for the first time, which could be something very big, something very small? Like, what was the first pilot or the first trial or the first steps you did when you realized, okay, our soil is going down. We don't want to leave farming and just give up. I'm saying just between brackets because it's obviously not easy, but we want to do something about it. What was the first step there?
Yeah, I think the first step, we are always looking at the practices with the lowest cost and the biggest benefits. And if you're talking about that, it's about, for us here in the Netherlands, it was about aiming for 365 days of covered soils.
Just to give a bit of background, how big is the farm? Where are you? I mean, I will link to it obviously in the show notes, but just to give a bit of background.
Yeah, we have an arable farm just 20 kilometers below Rotterdam. It's one of the real specific regions in the Netherlands for arable farming. So there are a few, mostly in the Netherlands, we have dairy farms. There are more on the meadowlands and on the peat areas. But on the sea clay areas, there are some specific spots in the Netherlands, and those are very useful and you could say highly productive for arable farming. And those are also the areas where the potatoes are growing in the Netherlands. You could say potatoes is our biggest export product, together with the onions and the shallots. And then you could say the areas with the lower quality, they usually grow or the cereals on it, or it's meadowland and peatland. So we are in one of those real specific arable plots. We have a farm of 360 hectares. For the Netherlands, that is pretty big because the average in the Netherlands is about 100 hectares. So we are more than 3 times bigger than that. And that's also, you could say, a bigger challenge to make the transition towards regen ag possible. Because what we saw in examples is that farms of a few hectares or just 10 or 20 hectares, it's much more easier to do the transition towards regen ag compared with these, you could say, highly industrial farming areas, which we are...
Thin margins.
Which we have here on the island. So for us, what I would just tell you, highly industrial, very efficient, heavily financially based crop rotation plan. So the first steps were mainly about, cover the soil 365 days. So we started with cover crops. At the beginning, it was just grass. But then soon later, we saw that it was better to use a bigger variety of cover crops. So we looked at root structure. So it's about more deep rooting cover crops. Also looking at added values of cover crops like nitrogen fixing. But also, you could say the more various your root system is, the better your soil structure can improve. So that was the first thing we started with. And then also one of the other measures we cut out is that and that was more about my knowledge from the water board, is that I saw that the level of antibiotics in slurry manure became very high. So we measured that, for instance, in the water levels through the water boards.
So basically instead of using artificial fertilizer. A lot of farmers are using slurry, especially because we have a large dairy industry.
No. In conventional farming here in the Netherlands, they use artificial fertilizers combined with slurry.
Coming from the dairy industry.
Yeah, dairy or pigs industry.
And you were seeing that antibiotics coming, which they were feeding or they were giving to these animals, you were seeing that in the water. So it meant it went through the animals, onto your land, into the water.
Yeah, so through the manure, we saw that you could say our soils were being intoxicated by antibiotics.
And the water around it.
Yeah, and with runoff, and it came in the surface water, and the water board was measuring that. And because we are such a specific arable region, the only way antibiotics, which have a reference to dairy, must come from the manure. So I told my husband, and soil life is very important. So let's cut out the slurry of manure and turn it to compost and only solid manure.
How difficult was that?
Very difficult, because it's not difficult to cut out the slurry manure, but to find solid manure, that's a very big challenge. Because most farmers only have slurry manure, solid manures only from farms with, you could say, a very authentic way of farming. So they have the cows and the pigs still on straw and not on a surface where the
concrete,
where the slurry goes through.
Because that's where they mix the manure with the liquid, and then you get a slurry. Yeah.
And then you have the separations, So that was the first challenge, and then we combined it with compost, but not any quality of compost. You have big varieties of quality of compost.
We had it on the show before. Yeah, it could be anything. Yeah,
we were very critical about that.
And did you see the antibiotics going down? Because with the solid manure, is there less antibiotics in it, or it's less prone to runoff? Did you see that as an effect also on the land and the water around?
Yeah, that's because there are so much farms around us. We can't measure the difference, but it is only about my knowledge that I know that in slurry manure, the antibiotics level is much higher than in solid manure. So that's why for our soils, we want to detoxify it. And those were the 2 steps to start with.
And now, like when you're looking, because you have many fields that are almost all the fields are in transition somewhere. And when we look, this was quite a few years ago when you started with this. Now, when you look at the most advanced fields, the fields that are by far the most, let's say, onwards in this journey, what are you doing there different than, let's say, a neighbor that's on a field next door? How can we, as non-farmers, if we're listening, if we would stand there and we would stand there maybe for a year, what would we see as difference compared to the neighbor that's doing things conventionally?
Yeah, from the foundation, we created a guidebook with 20 principles. And from those 20 principles, now on the most advanced plots, we apply 16 of them.
Wow.
So that's, you could say, what makes this difference than the neighbor is that maybe those 16 practices we are doing.
And those 4, now I'm curious, obviously, because I think I will link obviously to the guidebook. It said, what are the things you are not doing yet and why?
Yeah, the thing we are not doing yet is integrating. And that's also the regional problem, to combine it with cows or have a collaboration with a dairy farm where you could say rent cows or pigs or sheep. They are more than 60 kilometers away. So that gives a very big challenge. So we're not doing that yet. We try to substitute that with applying biofertilizer and make our own biofertilizer. And you can make various recipes of biofertilizer, and one of them is you can make one from solid manure. So you can have the advantage of all the fungi and biological activities and multiply it via a biofertilizer and then spray it on the fields. So that is how we try to substitute them. Also, one of them is use your own, you could say, growing material. So if you harvest potatoes, keep your potatoes separate and then use the baby potatoes to seed the year after that again. Because if you are able to do that, you will build up a natural resilience in your primarily product, you could say, the seeds you are using. We are not allowed to do that in the Netherlands because all seed material must be certified. And we don't have that capacity and that facilitation here on the farm. So we can get all our seed material certified. And if we're not producing food from certified seed, we are not allowed to sell our products to the retail. So that's more like
keeping it closed. Yeah.
So that's one else. And then you could say practices like the ultimate way is agroforestry, that you also integrate trees on your plots in lanes and bushes. We're not there yet. This is the first year we did some experience with lane farming. And you could say lane farming is a first step towards agroforestry. So integrate more trees.
And what is lane farming, just for people, that the different lanes next to each other are different crops, or is that very simply?
Yes.
So it's not one field of X meters by X meters?
No, you're not doing monocultures on a plot. So for instance, we started with, you could say, our most advantaged regen ag plot with this. It's a plot of 20 hectares. And on that 20 hectares, we grow 5 different crops in lanes, like 6 meters broad. Also, we integrated some biodiversity lanes in them, also to increase the natural resilience of that plot. And by doing that, you could say you make your plants more resilient because you don't have a monoculture. So diseases and plagues don't have that much to hold on when it's only a strip of 6 meters and another crop is alongside it. And if you choose it right, it can empower the other crops. So it's also about looking at which a crop can be a companion in natural resilience to other crops.
And how did that go the first year? I mean, it's early still, but what's your first, I mean, it's tricky for sure, because like planning wise, you need to be really, and movements of machines, etc., need to be orchestrated in a absolutely perfect way.
Yeah, but that's also, we are working with GPS and controlled traffic farming. So we are already there. So that's also one of the practices we apply on the farm. But what we see now, if, for instance, in the lane farming, we also grow our own soya beans because we also produce soy sauce.
Yeah, we had Bert on the show. I will link it below as well.
Yeah, from Tomasu. Yeah. And what we see now is that we did not spray anything on the soya field. We had some problems with snails, and then we made a biofertilizer based on garlic, and we sprayed that on it, and then the problem was solved. And that was mainly the only problem we had. And the plants are looking so healthy and big. We did not see them that big because we also have a monoculture plot with soybeans.
So you can easily compare, even though it's not the same plot and it's not in the same journey, but you can...
Yeah, but the plants in the lane farm looks much bigger. The leaves looks bigger. The plants are bigger. So you see that the plants is much healthier than it is compared with the plot with the monoculture on it.
Wow. And that's in 1 year. Imagine if you start tweaking the recipe further and find even better companions and how to, I mean, the rotation becomes a bigger puzzle, but yeah.
Yeah. And in the winter, we also, on the same lanes, we sowing different types of cover crops. For instance, for the soya, we wanted to sow in a nitrogen fixing cover crop. So we will capture nitrogen on a natural way into the soil. And when you grow the next year the soya on that, the soya can benefit from the nitrogen, which is, you could say fixed in the soil for them. So on that way, you can cut out artificial fertilizer also. And there are a lot of, if you have wheat problems, for instance, you can use other cover crops to suppress those wheat problems. And so, have the benefit of that the year after when you are sowing your cash crop.
And with all these experiments and all this work you're doing and transitioning all these plots, what was the reason to set up a foundation next to the farm and next to the work at Soy Heroes and of course next to the work at Tomasu? What was the reason to set up a non-for-profit on the farm, but next to the farm as a company farm?
Yeah, well, mainly because we experienced, as I told you, that in Northwest of Europe, regen ag farming is not known at all. And if we're looking at the system here, especially in the Netherlands, but also in Belgium mainly, it's all the advisors have the connection with the supply chain, or the artificial fertilizers or the plant protection product.
So the agronomists, the ones that need to help and work alongside the farmers, at the end of the day are paid through the industry, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but you know what they're selling. That's their...
Yeah. And it is in their benefit. You don't try other things and divide from their track.
Or other companies, or make your own biofertilizer like you're doing.
Yeah, so they don't like that. Maybe that's a little bit bad to say, but they sell fear and they sell risk.
Yeah.
So if you're telling a farmer you're taking a risk not by spraying, you should be afraid because your neighbor has plague this. Maybe you also need to spray so the plague don't come to your crop. That's their job. So they're telling you all things about risk management, about safety to protect your crops against plagues and diseases without it's really in your field, but just in case of. And we saw, okay, we need an independent place where people can come for knowledge about Regen Ag. So that's why we started the foundation. So it is primarily, you could say, to empower farmers in knowledge, in education about Regen Ag practices. So we try to provide it via the documents we are producing. For instance, the 20 principles we have now on our website. Also on the Experience Farm, we welcome a lot of farmers and organizations who wants to look how we are doing, because farmers really like to hear from other farmers how they are doing it, because it's really farm management related. And so that's one thing. And also we do a lot of projects on the farm to really make Regen Ag practices and the improvement of soil visible and measurable, because the more you can show them and more it's measurable, the higher, you could say, the reliability is for them that it's working, and they should try it also.
And so I think the measurement piece is absolutely essential, as we often hear anecdotally stories of farmers that are in some kind of transition, but then if you don't have the data underneath, it's really difficult to persuade or encourage others to start as well. So on the measurement part, what are you focusing on to show and to make public in this massive transition that the farm is on? What has been the measurement pieces you're working on?
Yeah, you could say in Soil Heroes, we started with the focus on 4 themes. So it's about carbon sequestration, it's about water holding capacity, biodiversity and nutrition. And on the first 3 elements, like the carbon sequestration, water holding capacity, and the biodiversity, we have now already projects running on the farm. We collaborate with, you could say, scientific partners on that, with the University of Wageningen and the University of Amsterdam on that.
What has been the biggest surprise? Because we often hear now in the scientific community, that there are actually that some of the leading farmers in the Regen Ag movement are almost ahead of what's happening in university plots or university farms. So what has been your biggest surprise working with these? What have you seen coming out that you maybe expected and they didn't, or the other way around?
Well, my first experience is that they were surprised that they were, you could say, approached by farmers to do this research instead of the other way around. Usually, university comes to farmers that they want to do some investigation. I think that also meant that we wanted especially to have scientific-based research on a very practical base. So it's about the lowest barriers for farmers. It's about gathering data which farmers understand, but a lot of farmers already are able to gather those data in a very easy way. A lot of farmers, for instance, here in the Netherlands already have a lot of sensors. They can do very easy soil analysis at their farm. And with those data, then we can provide them with, that's what we're working on a real outcome to measure water holding capacity and carbon sequestration. And for biodiversity, it's mainly about, real counting biodiversity activity on your farm. So it's counting all the insects. It's also counting macrofauna in the canals alongside the plots. and see what the differences are, see how far the biodiversity power is divided from those, for instance, biodiversity lanes.
Yeah, you published something on that recently, right? There's some research coming out on...
Yeah. It's about designing your plots.
Especially with this lane farming as well, to really... So you're just out of clarity, a biodiversity lane is a lane that you have either around the farm or also integrated into plots that is not being harvested, but is primarily being seeded with a mix of different plants and flowers, etc., to help biodiversity, a lot of insects mainly. And this research was to look at what's the effect, like how far do these insects actually travel and help the plants? And when do you need to plan your next biodiversity lane to have the full effect on the plots that are next door?
Yeah. And the research of the Wageningen University, of the Amsterdam University, who's helping us, is mainly in potatoes, because the potato is the most important crop for us. And what they choose to look at the aphids population in potatoes and see how much, aphids, luizen.
It's an insect type. Yeah. Okay. So it's one that you don't want, right? That's just to be.
Yeah. And then look how much from such a biodiversity element the aphids populations is suppressed by natural pest control.
And how far was that? Like, how far did these insects fly and ate these aphids from the plant or somehow suppress them?
We are now in the third year. And what we see now is that it's about 150 meters.
Which is far.
Yeah. And if you have, for instance, on the sides, on the field margins, your biodiversity lane, you need to have such a lane every 300 meters. And then you could say your crops is covered a bit for the natural pest control. So those are the first outcomes we are now having. And pollination, it even goes further. But we see that plots or plants who don't have access to natural pollination, we do that research in our soya bean fields, and we see that those plants are producing 30 to 40% less in weight of beans compared with the plants who have access to natural pollination. So it really means something.
Which means that you can make that calculation of, okay, I'm losing between brackets, a few meters of a biodiversity lane, but I'm getting 30 or somewhere like a lot more in terms of soybean weight, which is a very important measure. And then you can make the calculation, which probably falls in favor of hiring insects for the job.
Yeah, so it's more about what we add to the research of the universities, that it needs to be practical, doable by the farmer himself, not that cost intensive, because a lot of research done by university, and when the farmers want to apply them, they're really cost intensive. And it also must be doable for them. They must understand what they are doing. And also because when they understand what they are doing, when they understand the outcome of the data, they really see the improvement. And then they also get encouraged to go further with more measures or do it on more plots. And the same is with, for instance, the research on biodiversity. If you combine it with the elements economics, and you will have a very powerful instrument, because it's not about only ecology, it's also about economy. And those were the elements we are looking for here at the farm. And the third team we want to start this autumn is a big nutrition project. Mainly it's about if your soils are healthier or become healthier, you will see that the dynamics in soil are increasing between also the plants and the products and the soil. So there are a lot of literature available already where everybody is telling about if you get healthy soil, you get a healthy plant, you get a healthy product. Okay, how can we make that measurable and visible?
In your circumstances, in your context.
Yeah. And together with Dr. Jill Clapperton from the USA, she has developed a great system for that. And it's all based on measuring nutrients in the soil, measuring the same nutrients then in the plant and in the products. And if the soil is healthy, the transition must be there. And you must see the correlation between the nutrients in the soil, in the plant, and in the products. So what we want to do with research is not only provide with evidence that the better the balance is reached in soil, the better the correlation is between those three elements. But also we want to show that the density of those nutrients and the difference between the nutrients, so more nutrients in the products, is achieved. And if we can do that, I think we have a very powerful research for farmers to have a communication with the retail, because they then really can say, I've grown my potatoes on a regen ag way. My potatoes have a higher nutrition level than just a conventional grown potato. I've got a research paper here from Sol Heroes Foundation who says that. And I want you to pay me more because I did a bigger and a greater job. So that's what we want to achieve with the last project.
Super interesting. And very concretely, you're looking for funding for that. So anybody interested in showing this relationship between healthy soil, healthy plant, healthy produce, and then we go, as I know Jill Clapperton, I'll put the interview below as well. We had her on the show. Thanks to you guys, by the way. She's also working with Dan Barber, who also should be out soon or is already out with this interview when you're listening to this. But showing that relationship then with healthy people, healthy gut system and healthy people, and then healthy ecosystem. That line is very, very strong and needs to be shown everywhere. It cannot be shown just in grain somewhere. It needs to be shown also in potatoes and also in soybeans and also in onions, because we need, as you're selling your huge farm, you're selling mostly to retail. You're not selling directly on a farmer's market, which is impossible. We need to have an argument to the retail saying, okay, this is not the same potato as the other potato. This is a fundamentally different thing. And thus we need to have a discussion about price, and because it has a different benefit to your end consumer. And so it's absolutely essential research that we have to do.
It's nice you mentioned Dan Barber, because Jill is also very connected with Dan. She wants to do this research also on the farm from Dan Barber. Then she wants to do the research on our farm, on our experience farm, you could say. And then probably also in a farm in Finland. So you got like the more colder continent. You got you could say the Northwest Europe continent, the sea clay. And then she wants to do it on a continental climate-based farm and from Dan Barber. So by combining those three research projects, you could say, it's also building up a higher reliability if it's done on three different farms in three different types of soils, because then you really can show that the relation and the correlation is there.
You've mentioned the experience farm a few times. What's your vision there? What's already there? I mean, people can experience the farm literally, but there's a bigger vision to be built. I mean, people can, I've done that. Other people I know, you go on a tour, you see many different interesting things, but your vision on the experience farm, I think, is bigger than what it is now and just to visit the farm. So what's your vision on making sure that people can really experience this, and mainly farmers and other people from the food sector, obviously, like retail needs to experience this as well. But let's start with farmers. What should they experience in your vision of an experience farm?
The experience farm is our own farm, and that has its limits, because we also have a very highly economic pressure on the farm. You could say it's a family farm. So our highest ambition is to have an independent experience center with his own fields around it, where we can experiment on a much higher level than we do now. Because now we always need to be aware of the current farm management itself. We also need to rely on our own employees for that. But from my perspective, we really need an independent place.
Which is not selling anything.
Yeah. And also, just to be honest, it's now in my house. It's in our home. It's in our...
Which is nice until it's not nice anymore.
Yeah. No. So an independent place where we can 100% focus on this with experience fields around it, giving students a full-time 365 days, providing them an experience field research area.
How big are you imagining? How many hectares do you think is ideal in your context to show stuff? Is it 20? Is it 50? Or?
Yeah, because we really want to be an example for the large scale farms. As I told you, that is the biggest problem. And I think if you're aiming for the big change, then you need to aim for the industrial way of farming. So we need to aim for bigger farms.
Because it's the biggest amount of hectares and the biggest amount of antibiotics and the biggest amount of spraying. And it's where
I would say a farm of 100 hectares then must be the example, then the ideal example. So having such an experienced farm started here in Northwest Europe, because I think we have a lot of farmers to convince here. Also, it's an area where a lot of industrial farming has been done. But then also, if you look at a wider global perspective, I also think that per climate zone or per types of farm, I also think that, for instance, for dairy, there's a totally different scope of measures, scope of focus for transition towards regen ag. So it's not only we want to start with our own arable experienced farm, but I think we also, in the end, need to look at different global zones and also different types of farming.
And do you see any business model there? I'm asking because I always love to ask the question, what would you do with $1 billion? And it sounds like you would focus on experienced farms. But do you see any way of business model, or it would really be experienced farms need to be, they need to be independent for sure, but they also need to be a non-for-profit, or they shouldn't have to focus. Like, what do you see there? Is there any way, because it's maybe a lot easier to start many of these if there is some kind of small, even very small business model, and you don't need to raise only grant funding for it, or will it be blended? What do you think?
No, I think the aim is that it's a farm which provides profit, because otherwise we don't empower farmers.
From the farming properly, from the farming system as a whole.
Yeah, and that's also why I think the experienced farm needs to be about 100 hectares because of a crop rotation plan and the types of crops, and it must be economically feasible also.
What do you need for 100 hectares in the Netherlands for an experienced farm as an investment? Asking very bluntly. Yeah.
$1 million.
Which, I'm not saying I have it in my back pocket, but yeah.
And here in the area where we live, it's almost 100,000 euros per hectare.
Wow.
So if you want 100 hectares, it's $1 million. Plus buildings.
Running costs and everything. Yeah, it's not just that. Plus the biofertilizer. Because just for clarity, when you say we make our own biofertilizer, how many liters do you make? Because it's not one little pen somewhere that some farmers I know use. This is almost a brewery, basically.
Yeah, it is a brewery. And there's an employee working on that full time, or 3 days a week during the growing season, 3 to 4 days a week. And then also we make our own compost tea. And compost tea is a process of 24 hours. And making a biofertilizer is a process of several months when you have a batch ready. So we make a batch for 1,000 liters. And it's about making your biofertilizer mainly through the whole year and storage it. The good thing about biofertilizer is you can storage it as long as it's in a dark place and it's not getting there too hot and it's not getting there below zero. So that's a good thing. You can make it in advance. But we use thousands and thousands of liters of biofertilizer. And it's mainly looking like a factory on its own. And above that, the compost tea. So the compost tea is usually, for instance, sprayed every 8 to 10 days. And if you use that on 360 hectares, you can imagine how much that must be.
And if there is one thing you could change in the agriculture and food system, or in general, but let's say agriculture and food. So you have a magic wand, you have a magic power to change something overnight. We wake up tomorrow morning and Mellany has changed one thing in the food system and agriculture system. What would that be?
Yeah, I would like to change from the quantity focus within industrial farming towards the quality of the products in industrial farming. So it's about the nutrients density in the products. It's about the diversity of the nutrients in the products, because what we see now is farmers are only paid for the amount of food they are producing. They're not looking at the nutrition value of the food. They are not looking at the density of nutrition. So if I could change one thing, that would be the one. And also by just focusing on that one, knowing that there is a correlation between healthy soils and the nutrient density and the diversification in nutrients in your products, you will achieve what we are looking for, and that's building soils again.
And for the non-farmers listening to this, and I hope there are many, obviously, investors either managing their own money or managing other people's money, listening to this without giving investment advice, because obviously that's not what we're doing here. But what would you advise them, nudge them towards to look at as you are in this journey? There's still a lot of unknowns, but there's still a lot of knowns already. What should investors focus on? Is that the nutrient part mostly? Is it machinery? Is it setting up independent agronomic advice? What do you tell to people that come to your kitchen table, now still your kitchen table, not the experience farm, when they have a coffee and they say, okay, I'm ready. I'm ready to put money to work to invest in this movement, but I don't know where. Help me. What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, it would be definitely everything to make measurable and visible the amount of nutrients in the products, because I think that's the end. That's also the thing, you could say, the product which is going to consumers. There is the accelerating also to our big social and global community around us. Health problems are one of the biggest problems we have. So I would say everything aligned with make it nutrient density and diversification of nutrient visible and measurable. And the better we can do that, the more reliable, also the outcome must be for soil improvement. So if we can really measure and make it visible that things are changing in the nutrient density and in the different diversification of nutrients, we really know that the soil is getting healthier also. And
so would that be also your focus if you would be, let's say, in charge of a large investment fund, let's say $1 billion or €1 billion? Would that be on the experience farm part? Would it really be on a lot of measurement of nutrient density, or both? Like, what would you focus on if you would be in charge of quite a large investment amount? So there are investments, could be very, very long term, but how would you put that to work in the different sectors you're active in?
Yeah, first, if you want to communicate that it's the fact, then you need to base it on research. So that's also why at the Experience Farm now, we are starting with the research project. But after that, I think it's about communication, and it's about, maybe big market communication activities.
To show this potato is not the same as that potato, and this tomato is.
Yes, and not only for farmers, to empower them to have a better negotiation level with the retail, but also to governments. I think governments also play a very big role in this. Also for consumers, so because a lot of change only exists because consumers ask it, consumers demand it. A lot of things about nutrition and food and soils are not known at all by consumers. So there's a big power there in consumers also when they are getting informed about these practices. And then, of course, I think there are a lot of organizations and retail companies who are also, will be seeing the benefit of this and maybe start a transition also so we can achieve the transition from the quantity towards quality.
And what do you think of all this attention that I think the last 18 months specifically on carbon? Like, it seems to be the only thing that matters. And like suddenly the world sort of wakes up to the potential of carbon, but you very specifically have been talking about nutrients and water and biodiversity and very little on carbon. What do you think of all the hype, I would actually definitely go with hype around the focus on carbon and soils?
Yes, a pity that carbon is the only currency now for the services which the soils can provide us. So we're talking in research, we are talking about ecosystem services. So if we're talking about carbon sequestration from a farmer's perspective, this is not the very interesting ecosystem services he is dealing with. If you're talking from a perspective of a farmer, and I think that is the really strong point from the Soil Heroes Foundation, is we want to empower farmers. It's more about water holding capacity and have risk management on drought periods, have risk management on too wet periods. So increasing water holding capacity is for them much more important than carbon sequestration. The same is with you could say the biodiversity part, because it increases natural resilience, and therefore they can provide us with healthier crops, and they don't need to apply as much as plant protection products as they did in the last few years. but also the nutrient part, because then you empower again the farmer with the negotiation with the retail. And
with carbon, you don't. Yeah. Do you think people that are now getting hyped about carbon will at some point see that the other layers, like will get excited and then hopefully transition to, let's say, a deeper understanding of all the other benefits? Like, is it a good gateway drug to start? Okay, and then you get hooked and you go deeper and deeper, or are you scared that people get super excited and then if they don't see the results immediately that everybody's promising, like we can save the climate by farming differently and storing all the carbon, that it would start for looking for something else? Or what do you see happening? Do people go deeper?
Yeah, I certainly think that the carbon sequestration market opened the first doors, that people were aware of the ecosystem services, which are depleting now because our soils are depleting. But for looking at the real validation of those ecosystem services, it's a pity that only carbon sequestration is now a form of payment. And it's again very strong based on maintaining industrial ways of producing, which we're doing now. And what we are aiming for is going back to the natural basis. And that means we need to leave the industrial way of farming. So it goes beyond only carbon. And also the problems, especially which we have now in Europe, we have big drought and heat in the south of Europe, bushes of burns there. We have a very, very wet growing season here in the north of Europe. We are suffering floods here. We had a very big floods in Germany and in Belgium and also in the Netherlands. So also the ecosystem service of water holding capacity is becoming to be an issue.
It's probably more important than carbon at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you are looking at biodiversity and nutrition, the European Committee tries to make first steps in the eco-schemes of the new CAP, but it's on a very shallow basis. And we don't have the time. We need to speed up. And the only thing we can speed up is by gaining the knowledge and try to make farmers aware of that they can benefit from it also when they are improving their soils, and make it validation economic feasible for them towards retail. But it's also about empowering farmers, because now if you're looking at farmers, they get beat by the financial system. They are totally pushed in a corner by retail. They are totally empowered by advisors which are working for fertilizers company and plant protection products company. So it's a holistic system. And it's not one solution. And what we want to do is first knowledge and through empowering farmers, make the transition to farms himself, instead of the world above it or around us coming with solutions and working towards them, because then we know it's never in the benefit of the farmer. And if we really want to make the transition in farming feasible,
the farmer needs to lead it.
Yeah.
I think it's a perfect way and a perfect moment to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Mellany, for taking the time and sharing. And I hope the Experience Center and Farm will be there. We'll soon move out of your kitchen, let's say, and many more people will be able to experience it, because it's also a capacity thing. And of course, if you're farming full time, you cannot constantly, even if you wanted to, constantly show people around. And I think there are many people that want to visit and experience. So I'm really much looking forward to that. And obviously on all the research pieces, I will link a lot of it below in the show notes on the website. But thank you so much for taking the time today. And we'll be definitely checking in on all these fascinating pieces.
Okay, thanks to you also, Koen. And hope we will talk again soon on the Experience Farm.
If you found the Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food podcast valuable, there are a few simple ways you can use to support it. Number 1, rate and review the podcast on your podcast app. That's the best way for other listeners to find the podcast, and it only takes a few seconds. Number 2, share this podcast on social media or email it to your friends and colleagues. Number 3, if this podcast has been of value to you, and if you have the means, please join my membership community to help grow this platform and allow me to take it further. You can find all the details on gumroad.com/investingregenag or in the description below. Thank you so much, and see you at the next podcast. Dear friends of the podcast, I'm super excited to share with you the online video course Investing in Regenerative Agriculture and Food. How to put money to work in regenerating soils at scale and growing a lot of tasty food while doing it. Why are we doing this course? After 100 interviews and more than 100 hours of audio asking the question how to put money to work in regenerating soils, and have been following the space since 2011 and recording these podcasts since 2016, we thought it was time to share our lessons learned. What have we seen in the space over the last years? How have we built our decision-making framework? What to focus on with the podcast? How have we picked interviewees? And what questions should you ask? What is happening in the space? What should you read? What should you listen? What should you watch? How to approach this space? For whom is this course? You, the soil builders and investors in this space. The soil builders, people working in this space, entrepreneurial farmers, fund managers, vehicle builders, crowd investing, platform builders, ag-tech companies, farm-to-gut food companies, permaculture, keyline designers, holistic management consultants, etc., etc. People that are building soil at scale. And the investors who are putting their own money to work through their family office or as private individuals, or people who are putting other people's money to work through foundations, institutional capital, banks, insurance companies, etc. Is this course free? No. This is pay what you think it's worth. Meaning, I have no way of knowing what this course will be worth to you. And I'm very aware that among the listeners of this podcast, we have people with very different means. So I'm inviting you, if this course is creating value to you, and if you have the means, to consider paying what you think it's worth. Thank you. So what is this course? It's currently a series of 17 videos, mostly ranging from 10 to 15 minutes, plus PDF slides, so you don't have to ride along. We're gonna look into why invest in regenerative agriculture and why extractive agriculture is so risky, how to invest, what kind of frameworks you could and I think should build, what to invest in, what kind of co-investors you could find, or what kind of investors you could find if you're a soil builder. Every lesson will have a digging deeper part where I will share what kind of reports, what kind of interviews, what kind of videos you can look into if you want to dig deeper. We're going to look at nutrient density, landscape design, and a lot more. So what is it not? It's not a list of investable deals. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist in this world. We're really at the beginning of the regenerative agriculture and food revolution. It's also not investment advice. Before making any investment, please find professional investment advice. So get ready, get a cup of coffee, a cup of tea, or whatever you're drinking, click on the link below, sign up, and I'm really looking forward to your feedback.